Test, 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 test. Test, 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 test. Non, on m'entend pas? Moi, je m'entends pas? Toi, tu... Alors, c'est peut-être que j'ai pas...
Au niveau de l'ordinateur, c'est pas...
Test, test.
Pas, au moins,
C'est peut-être le... Test, test, test.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today. Today, the World Meteorological Organization is releasing the annual Airborne Dust Bulletin. This gives details of the hotspots, the hazards posed by sand and dust storms every year, and it describes what we as the World Meteorological Organization are trying to do about it. We release this bulletin every year just ahead of the International Day to Combat Sand and Dust Storms, which is on the 12th of July, so that's this Saturday. There is a high-level event taking place this afternoon by the President of the General Assembly in New York. So obviously this is something that the United Nations, the international community, does take very seriously. It is a major hazard. And so without further ado, I will hand you over to the WMO expert on sand and dust storms and many other things, also on wildfires. She's a scientific officer. Her name is Sarah Bazat, and she's with WMO's Global Atmosphere Watch network. So without further ado, I will pass you over to Sarah. The press conference will be in English. If there's any requests for interviews, Sarah is Spanish, so we can give interviews in Spanish. And you should by now all have received the press release, which is available in all official UN languages. So thank you.
Thanks a lot, Claire, for the introduction, and welcome everyone. As Claire mentioned, we are here, and I'm talking on behalf of the World Meteorological Organization, because today is the week that we are celebrating this International Day for Combating Sand and Dust Storms, which is held every year at 12th July, and this year is Saturday, then we are advancing celebrations. And this day is a day for raise awareness about the importance of sand and dust storms for health and sustainability. And it is also a proud moment for us, WMO, for launch this regular bulletin that is focusing on airborne dust, and this means sand and dust storms. This is a critical tool in our shared efforts to monitor, forecast, understand sand and dust storms, and also the risk associated with all of them. Also, it's important because we are monitoring its intensity and frequency and how all this is impacting climate, weather, and ecosystems, for example. Sand and dust storms are no longer a distant and regional problem. They are global in nature and is carrying these particles across continents, oceans, and affecting air quality, health, agriculture, and other socioeconomic sectors. What begins in a storm in Sahara, it can darken skies in Europe. What is lifted in Central Asia can alter air quality in China. The atmosphere does not recognize borders. The impacts are well documented. They affect billions of people worldwide. They doesn't stop at the borders because it travels thousands of kilometers, reducing visibility, damaging crops, grouting flights, and harming your lungs. At global scale, dust interacts with solar energy, with the climate system, absorbing and scattering sunlight. Also is altering oceans and ecosystems, and for the reason is an important element of the Earth system. In short, this is not an isolated weather phenomena. They are complex and demand equally multi-sectoral responses. Our bulletin, the Airborne Dust Bulletin, is our global snapshot of the past year. In this edition, we are doing some kind of a snapshot of the dust hotspots worldwide, and they are coming from Sahara, China, Central Asia, North America, and even Australia. Can you show the slide, please? Thank you. As you can see in the image, it's clearly stressed where are the sources at global scale, mostly dominated in the Northern Hemisphere. Also in the bulletin, we are doing some screenshots, snapshots, and specific study cases, trying to understand the links of these extreme events connected with climate change and land degradation. Also, there are many data and many pieces in which we are trying to emphasize the links of sand and dust storms with the impacts in health and also climate. They are costly, and we know it's not just economically, it's socially and environmentally, and we are stressing the need of early warning systems and land management strategies for reducing these impacts. Research and advances in forecasting and monitoring is powered by WMO Global Network of Regional Centers. At present, we have 4 DAS regional centers supported by WMO, which are in China, Spain, Barbados, and Saudi Arabia. The good news, we can act. We are advancing and implementing in early warning systems, now reaching more countries than ever. Also, we are promoting a lot of cross-border cooperation, which is fundamental for creating capacity in the countries to reduce the impacts posed by this phenomena. But we need more. We need more investment, more awareness, more collaboration. And this can help us to the risk that this natural hazard is posed in environment, health, and risk disaster. Combating the root causes and impacts of sun and dust storms requires coordinated effort. And we are seeing that. The United Nations, as Claire mentioned at the beginning, is now launched in 2019, launched the Coalition for Combating Sun and Dust Storms that involve more than 15 United Nations agencies and other organizations that are working together to overcome the strategy to reduce the impacts of sun and dust storms. Also, the United Nations declared the Decade for Sun and Dust Storms starting this year in 2025, and is mostly focusing in creating synergies between sectors and strengthening collaboration between regions and improving the capacity building in the countries. In this context, WMO and many national meteorological and hydrological services continues to build regional centers of excellence, early warning systems, and promoting knowledge-sharing platforms to advance and support the countries. Countries are increasingly investing in dust monitoring, forecasting, and mitigation strategies. These are signs of hope, but also reminder that we must do more, faster, and together. And with that, thanks a lot for your attention, and welcome questions from the online.
We'll start with a question in the room and then we'll go to the platform. So if you could just introduce yourselves, thanks.
Yes, thank you. Is it okay for the sound? Okay, so I will ask the question. My name is Agnès Pedrero. I'm working for Agence France Presse. I have two kind of questions. Some questions regarding to what you present, but also some questions regarding to the fires. So I don't know how you want to do that. So the first questions, there's some sound, no? The first questions about the bulletin. You say that there's no this problem is no longer regional, but it's global. So if you could explain why there has been this change, why before it was a regional issue and now it's global. And then you mentioned that you have looked at the link with the climate change. Maybe if you could elaborate on that, say explaining what is the link with the climate change? Is climate change increasing the risk or not? Or yes, what are your conclusions on that? And then maybe I will ask after a question on the fires. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for your questions. We are putting the context of global because it's true that there are regions that are more affected, the ones that are connected with sources, but we are looking at the global context is the transport. Things that are happening in Sahara, it's a spread through the Atlantic, hitting Americas. Then this became a global concern because it's transboundary, as I mentioned before, and is a broad region, and also because the links of dust within the Earth system is an important component in all this climate assessment, radiative forcing assessment. Dust is part of this global Earth system. Then it's true that the strategies for mitigating the risk are at regional scale, of course, because each region is completely different. It's not the same what is happening in Africa than in Middle East and in China, or even the regions that are receiving this transport, like Europe, are having these totally different strategies. But it's a global phenomena because there are some events, and this year we saw some events that starts in Sahara and covers almost the whole globe. It's transboundary, yeah. And about climate change, there are some clear warnings about the risk on the frequency and the intensity. It is stressed in the bulletin every year. We are taking a look, for example, to the frequency and intensity in specific regions. And for example, last year, in the bulletin of last year, it was stressed anomaly in the intensity of frequency of events in Southern Europe in wintertime, which is not the typical season. And it was connected with a severe drought in North Africa that was favoring this. Then drought is climate change, is one of the risks. If you have more desertification, more droughts, less precipitation, this is favoring the occurrence of sun and dust storms. And of course, we have to look at the trends. And also it's important, the strategies at the national level on land management, which is one of the key things here where we can do some source mitigation strategies. But yeah, it's clearly linked with changes in climate.
If I could add, maybe you can elaborate. And it's also part of a vicious cycle. If you think it was 2 or 3 years ago, we had a very bad sand and dust storm in Europe, late February, March, and it sort of just covered the Alps. And so instead of snow, we had sand, if you cast your mind back. And that year was a particularly bad year for glacier melt. And it was one of many reasons. It wasn't the only reason, but it was a contributing factor.
And connected with Claire is saying, is the year of the glaciers. And in Central Asia, for example, one of the big discussions is how desert dust, this dust is deposited on the glaciers and is speeding up the melting of the glaciers. If we are thinking in this specific element of the Earth system, and taking benefit of the year of the glaciers, we can mention also this connection with the cryosphere, for example.
If we take the questions on sand and dust first, and then we'll come back to the wildfires at the end, if that's okay.
Yes, just a follow-up on what you explained. But my first question on the regional global was more like you presented like it's no longer a regional problem and now it's a global. But I mean the sand coming from the desert, I guess it was already moving from continent to another continent even many years before the climate change.
It's a global concern, but the mitigation strategies and adaptation strategies must be at regional. Maybe this is different. When you talk about the impact is global, distributed, the strategies for mitigating are considered that needs to be regional.
I think we're probably better now at connecting things, coordinating than we were even 10 years ago. So as Sarah said, we have the regional centers for forecasting. So Barcelona Dust Center is responsible for Europe, North Africa, Beijing for China, then we have Barbados for the Caribbean and Saudi Arabia now for the Middle East. But they all work very much together, and so we are better now at sort of connecting the dots and crossing the T's than we were before. And there is this now a pretty active global coalition, which there wasn't even 6 years ago. It was 2019 you said it was set up, so yeah. And so if we go now to the platform, Jeremy.
Yes, thank you, Claire. I've got a couple of questions. The first two questions is regarding numbers. I'd like you some explanation on the Bulletin. You said that every year you have 2,000 million of tons of sand and dust that enters the atmosphere. I'm terrible with math here, but can we say that it's 2 billion actually? Like 2,000 million is 2 billion. That's correct. First question. Second question is also you're mentioning that 330 million people are affected But at the same time, you're saying in the bulletin that nearly 4 billion people are exposed to dust levels according to the WHO safety guidelines. So how do you explain the discrepancy between 300 million people affected and 3 billion exposed to dust levels? And the last question, not on numbers, I promise this time, is about, can you elaborate a bit more on the consequences? We talk about the glaciers, but I think it's quite interesting, but what you're saying in the bulletin is that dust storm is not only like dirty windows on your cars and the reddish sky, is more than that. So how can you explain what are the consequences on agriculture and solar production, for instance?
Now you can hear me. Pardon. Starting from the first question about the dust emissions, 2 billion, sorry. It was the estimation in the last IPCC 2013, if I'm not wrong. And we are using this number as a reference, but it's true that there are advances in science and the climate global community is advancing because it's having uncertainties, this estimation, and in each IPCC is trying to reduce the uncertainty on the estimations. But 2 billion is a good order. The important thing is to understand what are the sources of these emissions, and the community agreed that 80% of the total emissions at global scale are coming from North Africa and the Middle East. This is where we have the big hot spot at global scale. About the second question that you mentioned, it was about people exposed. I don't know where is the number that you mentioned of 2 million or 3 million, but in the bulletin, it's mentioned one recent publication in Lancet Countdown is one of the reference journals on climate and health impacts. And in this study, I'm looking at the bulletin to don't say anything wrong, but it's not mentioned explicitly any number in terms of millions, but it was clear in this analysis that is based on reanalysis in modeling tools, is that all countries worldwide are affected somehow on sun and dust storms. The population is exposed to these sun and dust storms, and there are some countries that are more affected, of course, the ones that are close to the sources. And the point here is to understand how many days per year you are exposed to concentrations over the thresholds that the WHO air quality guidelines impose for particles. This means PM10 and PM2.5 that are particular matters with specific sizes of 10 microns and 2.5 microns. Then what is emphasized in the study is that now in the last years, the people is more exposed than in the early 2000s, for example. But yeah, it was almost 3 billion people in this study that it was mentioned. I don't know where you find the other form, but
I think one of the figures we give is a general figure, and I think there's a difference between people who are sort of exposed to it and then people who are really affected by the, when the air quality deteriorates below the WHO safety guidelines, when you've got the particle matter goes above a certain level. So there is a subtle difference.
Yeah, in fact, in the bulletin, what is stressed is that 30% of this increase is covered by 3 billion people. But yeah, we can, depending on the interpretation of the number, this can change a bit. But the point is that it is recognized that dust is covering the whole globe, and somehow all of us, we are exposed to these particles.
Jeremy, I think you had one last question, didn't you? Was it the impacts on agriculture? Could you just repeat
Yes,
the last question?
And it was the only one with no numbers in it. If you can elaborate on the consequences, I mean, for agriculture, solar production, things that we don't necessarily think of.
Impacts in socioeconomic sectors. The more clear is the visibility reductions that is affecting basically transportation, ground transportation, but also airports. Solar energy, if you think in that particles are suspended on the air, this causes changes in the solar irradiance that are arriving to the panels. But on top of that, also dust is a nice nucleation. It's having very, how to say, it's an element that favors the formation of clouds because it's having a very strong component with the cloud formation. Then this is affecting the cloud formation that in turn is also connected with the irradiance that is arriving to your panels, because if you have clouds, obviously it is reduced. Apart from that, you have the deposition of these particles on the panels, that if you're thinking that solar energy big farms are in areas where you have more desertic soils, this means cleaning, and cleaning is having a cost. Then it's very important for this sector, solar sector, to know about this deposition on the panels that is called soiling, because as much as you have more particles, the efficiency of the panel is reduced, and then of course your production is reduced. But on top of that is the cleaning that is costly, because water is a precious element in some desertic places. If you think in agriculture, is also the deposition on dust on the crops when they are at the beginning of the phases of growing. If you have a lot of dust, this can destroy the crop, but also is connected with desertification, with the stability of the soils. Also, if you have a lot of dust, you reduce again the solar irradiance that is arriving to your plants, then this is affecting the cycle. But also the good news is that dust is a good nutrient for ecosystems. I mean, it's not everything bad. If you have few dust, this can be very good because it's a fertilizer. Phosphorus and iron are elements inside dust that are favoring, for example, ocean geochemistry processes, but also the fertilization of the Amazonas. Then there are things that are good and things that are not so good. But here the importance is to understand when the hazard starts.
Okay, we'll have one more from the platform and then go into the room. So Christian Ulrich of the German news agency.
Thank you, Claire. I also have a few questions. Please bear with me. This figure of 2 billion tons is 12 years old. Are the other figures also pulled from old reports, or are there new figures in this report? Is the problem of sand and dust storms bigger than before or not bigger than before? Is there a figure that could show us that the problem has increased or decreased? And what is the distinction between sand and dust? We were mostly talking about dust now, but is there a distinction between sand and dust, or is that a fluid change? And my last question is, what is the role of wildfires in sand and dust distribution? Because I understood from a question earlier today that there is a connection between wildfires and dust. Thank you.
If I not answer all your questions, just let me know, because I'm not sure if I got all of them. Okay, about emissions, we have a large uncertainty. Depending on the study that you are looking at, the estimations of the dust emissions can be very different. One of the reasons of this large variability is because you cannot measure properly emissions. What we are measuring is concentrations in the air. Then what we are trying to improve is the estimation of the emissions based on what we know for sure that are the concentrations in the air. Then, as you can see in the bulletin, there is this surface concentration annual average. And what we are trying to track is there are some differences year by year on this concentration of particles in the air. Then from these concentrations in the air is when we are trying to understand the emission fluxes, but it's true that it's more challenging to measure fluxes of emission than concentrations. Then the uncertainties are larger in these estimations because depending on the methodology, it can have some broad ranges of values. But the order of magnitude in which all the studies agree is billions, tons, let's put, tons of dust are emitted in the air. For atmospheric concerns, the important thing is to understand the concentrations of these particles in the air and also the positions, for example. Then we are trying to explain about the emissions, but what we are looking mostly as important parameters are concentrations and the positions. The other question was...
Is it getting worse?
It's getting worse. It depends. This is the question that is recurrent in all these conversations with journalists and other sectors. It depends on the region. As you see in the bulletin, in the main figure, this year we have a blue color over sources, meaning that it seems that on sources we have less emissions, less concentrations, but in red is stressed the transport. We are having an increase of transport beyond the sources. Then for us it's important to... yeah, you can show the map, please.
If we just have the map up again.
Yeah, as you can see here, in blue we are having basically the hotspot at global scale, where are the most important emission at global scales. But the important thing here is that in Middle East, in Central Asia, we have a very strong hot spot. But if you see the reddish color are connected with the transport, which is important because this means that more countries are affected by this transboundary transport. It's not just in sources, but even though in sources we have high occurrence of events, it's true that maybe the intensity it's lower than previous years, but it's happening. The important thing here in this figure is that we are looking at the map and we can see that transport is growing, at least in comparison with the climatological time series that we have. And the third question was about connection, wildfires and dust. There is a connection, and some researchers in North America are stressing this connection. When you have a wildfire, after the wildfire, the vegetation is reduced, the soils are exposed, and then it begins sometimes to produce some small sand and dust storms very localized in these areas that are burned. And it's true, when you have no vegetation and you have soil exposed, then this is a consequence of wildfires.
A question in the room, and then we'll go to you, Agnes, afterwards.
Sir, I will keep my questions on the what.
Sorry.
Thank you. My name is Yixin with China Media Group. My question is, I want to follow up the first question about the link between dust storm and climate change. The dust storm is common in China, but usually in spring. And I see the report mentioned last year in June, there is a summer dust storm in northern China. So would you please elaborate on it with more details, how the summer dust storm with the link with the climate change, extreme weather, and what's the looking ahead? What's the new changes would be in China's dust storm under the context of climate change? Thank you.
China, yeah, we have big deserts there. And what we are looking in this monitoring of the year in the past 9 editions of the Bulletin is that in the last years we are looking at it's happening that there are more events in seasons where it's not the dusty season. As you mentioned, in China, there were this huge event in a season that is more anomalous to find these extreme events. And this is connected with the climate system, the Earth system, because again, dust is an important element of the Earth system. This means that changes in the land conditions, but also changes in the global circulation patterns are affecting this occurrence of extreme events. And for example, there are studies from Asian researchers that are stressing as a potential factor of changes in the circulation, on the regional circulation in East Asia and the Pacific, anomalies in the sea surface temperature of the ocean. This can cause some changes in the circulation patterns that are anomalous, and this can cause, is linked to this occurrence of extreme events out of the season. Also in the case of China, they are detecting these extreme events more regularly, meaning that there is a strong signal there that we have to take a more closer look and monitor better to understand the reasons of these extreme events. But it's true that it's happening in the last years, more extreme exceptional events in the catalog that it was tracked by in that case is the Beijing Dust Regional Center that is looking at the occurrence of sun and dust storms and providing forecast and monitoring tools for the countries in the region. Is China, Japan, Korea, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, all this part of the region is covered by the Beijing Dust Regional Center. And the connection with the health, of course, if there are new sources, because this is also happening, the desiccated bodies, the reduction of the ice cover, all these factors are producing new sources. They are very localized, but they can also impact people. And people means health, means socioeconomic activities, means economies. And it's true that more and more countries are trying to monitor changes in the land that can favor the occurrence of new hotspots of sun and dust storms. Also, China is having a lot of strategies for source mitigation, like the green belt that you have in the Gobi Desert is one good example. But it's true that climate change is favoring land degradation and desertification. Then we have to be aware that countries need to monitor these changes and keep inside these potential early warning systems that can alert about potential new activity in areas where it is not common.
Yes, some follow-up to the questions. Beyond looking last year on 2023, 2024, more generally, could you say if the sun and dust problem is getting worse or not? We're trying to understand that better, if it's a problem that is growing or not. I mean, for example, for the temperature, there is increased temperature with the climate change, the glacier, we understand. But on this specific issue, if you could say if this is a problem which is getting worse or not. And then the press release say that economic costs are rising. Could you give us the figures that show that economic costs are rising over the years? Thank you.
If you look at the global average, again, the problem is rising because it's getting worse in some regions, but in sources, for example, Sahara is Sahara, and they live under this condition of sources of dust, intense sun and dust storms. And you can see that the population is not dense around these hot spots of dust. What is getting worse is that we are having more and more sun and dust storms in those areas where before we're not having any warning, and now we have start to have more and more warnings in areas more populated, which is affecting people and economy. Also growing economies as in the Middle East, in the Arabian Peninsula, they are growing the volume of air traffic, for example. They are having more airlines in the Middle East countries, and this is increasing the risk. Also, we are having more monitoring tools, and now we are more aware about the extreme events, because keep in mind that the first satellite that allowed us to really quantify the amount of dust in the atmosphere, it was MODIS. It was in 2000s. Then getting better and worse in climate scales is risky to say, because you need 30 years. What we can tell you is that the year by year, we are detecting more anomalous events in those regions where the people is living. And sometimes are coming from sources that are not the typical deserts, are small sources that were inactive and now became more active because changes in atmospheric circulation. Then it's getting worse in some parts of the world, yes, because before they won't have this problem. And here, high latitude dust is a good example. Reduction of the ice are exposing soils, and this became a new warning for some regions that before they never had this warning. Then it's getting worse, yes, especially in some specific regions of the world. And high latitude dust with the reduction of the ice are getting more and more activity that before it was very sparse, it was very exceptional. And now Iceland is a good example, if you are asking me, in Europe. But also climate projections are telling us that Southern Europe, for example, it became a desert. Then it starts another warning. Then it's not just climate change, global circulation, it's also what is happening on the land, that it's favoring that we will have more and more. And transport of dust in Europe, we had an anomaly in between 2020 and 23. As Claire mentioned, there were a record-breaking event in Europe in 2022. It was exceptional in all the records that we have. Then it's getting worse. The occurrence of these events is getting worse, yeah. And we have to monitor this occurrence. But again, it's very specific on regions. And your second question was about the economic part. In the bulletin, if you try to establish the impact in economic terms of sun and dust storms, there are very few assessments. And in the report, we are emphasizing the need to start to push more impact, cost, benefit studies connected with sun and dust storms, because involve many sectors. And in the bulletin, what you will see is the summary of one article published in Nature that is trying to explain that we are underestimating this cost connected with sun and dust, because probably we are not involving all the sectors that are having this impact. Then the estimation of the cost probably can have, again, a broad spectrum of losses and cost benefit. But the important thing here is to start to stress that sometimes some events are connected with a thunderstorm, but the secondary effect is a haboob, that is this wall of dust that is connected with the convective cell. And then in the case of the database of risk disaster, probably they don't add the dust component, just leaving the first element that is the thunderstorm. These kind of discussions are the one that this article is, for example, emphasizing. Also, car accidents due to reductions of visibility. Most of the time, they are not reported that the reason of the reduction was sun and dust. Then what is stressed in this piece is that we can do estimations, but it's clear that the cost impact of sun and dust storms, it's totally underestimated.
What? More questions online. Yes, so on wildfires, I have a series of questions. Sorry for that, but we were told you are the expert, so we take advantage of that. Yes, first on the causes. how do wildfires contribute to climate change, and how does climate change influence itself on the wildfire risks? On the prevention, if you could tell us how much do you think we are prepared to face forest fires? What could be done to be more prepared, in particular in the high risk areas? And then how does climate change alter the fire regimes in the forest? What are the possible future scenarios? Thank you.
Fires, another key element in the Earth system, because again, it's something that is not just atmospheric, it's also land conditions. And obviously, if there is an increase of temperatures, a reduction of precipitation, vegetation became dry. This is fuel that easily can be burned. And then you will have these emissions that will go to the atmosphere. Again, there are gases and aerosols. This connects with this exchange of energy between sun and the atmosphere, meaning the famous radiative forcing tracked by the IPCC. Aerosols and greenhouse and other elements of the atmospheric composition are then connected. Then this worsens the climate change, right? Because you have emissions in the air, and then you are worsening this event, this cause. You have then reductions of precipitation, changes in cloud formation, increasing on temperature, and this affects the land condition that became a cycle. If you are worsening the conditions, you are increasing the risk of fires, right? This is intertwined, it's interlinked. We have to be aware that they are part of these emissions that we are talking about when we want to reduce emissions, to reduce the impact of climate change. This is the link, what we can do. Here there is an important human intervention. Policies at country level can do a very big difference between a high impact season or a less impact season in specific regions. And experts in Canada, in Amazonas, in the States, they can tell you that if you can prepare the season in advance to put resources, to do some kind of mitigation strategies before the season, this can help to reduce the risk. But there is a risk coming from the climate system, this is clear, but also the prevention, the preparedness, and the interventions from national governments is having a very strong component here on the how big can be your fire. But it's true in any case that these big fires are happening more frequently. And when we think about these big fires, you can think in North America, Canada last season, or Amazonas. And this is partly caused because climatic factors. This is right. But what we can do is to reduce the risk through better mitigation and preparedness strategies. And your last question, I think that it was the two of them, no? Right?
Yes, it's the last question was about the possible future scenarios. Where are we going? Are we going to see those kind of fires more frequently and in a more large part of the year, like we are seeing heat waves? They are not just in July or August, but in summer, but in a larger period. Yes, what are the scenarios and which direction are we going? Thank you.
The IPCC projections studies in I think that it was in the last report, was establishing that if we pass the 2 degrees in annual average of temperature, fires will increase about 30%, considering the different scenarios. And also this means 20% of burned areas, increase on the burned areas. It's not just the emissions itself, it's how much is extended. And as I said, there is a part that is climate, and the risk is there because it's a climatic risk here. But it's true that somehow you can reduce the risk if you are prepared. And it's true that the projections are telling us that with these scenarios of increasing temperatures, changes in precipitation, obviously the risk is higher. Outside the summer boreal or the summer in the north or in the south, depending on the hemisphere, the month can appear fires in months that are not the typical risky fire season. Yeah.
In the WMO community, we quite often talk about fire weather. So, for instance, I know the Bureau of Meteorology in Australia, which is, a country which is regularly affected by fires, they talk about an increasing risk of fire weather, which is, dryness, heat, quite often wind. But you also need to factor in that quite often wildfires are started by humans. And that is more difficult to control. But as Zara said, a lot of it is prevention. It's land management, it's forest management, and there you can do quite a lot to control the risk. I don't see any more questions on the platform or in the room. So thank you very much indeed to UNTV for hosting this. Thanks very much indeed for everybody who participated. Thank you.
you.